How's it going, everybody? I'm Sam Lee, and welcome to Gaming Instincts. Basing a piece of entertainment on events of actual history is often a double-edged sword. It is a treat to be able to visit such events in real time and play out potential fantasies in ways never previously imagined. Smash hit franchises such as Assassin's Creed and Call of Duty are renowned for dabbling with historical fiction throughout their games' narratives. Ghost of Tsushima is one such game. However, choosing to take the historical fiction route confines many elements of the game to the period in which they occurred, potentially limiting the direction and liberties a title could take. Inaccurate portrayals and anachronistic elements come under intense scrutiny from casual and hardcore history fans and can make players question the quality and integrity of the narrative being told on screen. Sometimes, creative liberties must be taken to deliver on good gameplay. Historical accuracy must be sacrificed for the sake of fun. Enjoyment trumps strict adherence to history after all. Even from a developer's standpoint, player convenience should take precedence. Ghost of Tsushima dances between the lines of being historically adherent and downright inaccurate. This piece will be tackling the game from multiple angles and analyzing what Ghost of Tsushima gets wrong, but also what it gets right. Part 1. Examining the history. As the game makes clear, Ghost of Tsushima takes place during the Mongol invasion of the Japanese islands in the late 13th century. Tsushima Island was indeed the first location Mongol forces landed, serving as a strategic crossroad from the Asian continent to the Japanese mainland. At the start of the game, Jin Sakai, Lord Shimura, the Jito of Tsushima, and their retinue of 80 samurai warriors organize a hasty defense along Komura Beach to intercept the invaders arriving ashore. Clans Sakai and Shimura are fictional, but among the names of Tsushima's defenders, several actual clans are mentioned. A notable samurai clan, Clan Kikuchi, is among them. Though the clan is thoroughly wiped out in-game, the actual clan was not on Tsushima at the start of the invasion. The clan and its leader, Kikuchi Takefusa, will leave their mark on history in later battles and invasions from the Mongols. The number of samurai who stood their ground against the Mongols is consistent with the number from history. It was 80 samurai against a force of around 8,000 Mongol warriors, making it a near hopeless battle from the start. Yet, the samurai stood their ground. What the game glosses over at the start is that the Jito of Tsushima wasn't so readily about to throw his and 80 other samurais' lives away at the get-go. When the Mongols initially landed, negotiation attempts were made, but were promptly rejected by a hail of Mongol arrows. The defenders were forced to retreat, but the actual fighting lasted much longer than the game portrays. While the Mongols quickly cut down all opposition at the start in-game, Tsushima's samurai will last from early morning to nightfall, all but perishing in a desperate final cavalry charge, which was what the game chose to start with. And like what happens in real life, the charge ends in utter disaster. From then on, what the game tries to drive home is the fact that Jin and his forces were the major driving force that ousted the Mongol invaders and prevented them from reaching the mainland. However, that simply wasn't the case. History doesn't like giving out plot armor so freely. With all its guardians fallen, Tsushima would follow suit. In but a few days, the entire island is under Mongol control, like how it was in-game. However, the Mongol forces didn't dawdle on the island for much time. Ghost of Tsushima actually stretches out the Mongol stay on Tsushima. Otherwise, it would have been an incredibly short game. After arriving on November 2nd, 1274, the invaders set their sights towards Iki Island, Tsushima's southeastward neighbor, which was a stone's throw away from mainland Japan, and embarked on November 13th. Iki would meet the same fate as Tsushima. The Mongols eventually reached Hakata Bay by November 19th, a bay in the northwestern part of the Japanese mainland island, Kyushu. It was here where the winds of fate blew in favor of Japan. Amassing a sizable defense force of 6,000 strong compared to a pitiful 80 and 100 of Tsushima and Iki respectively, the Japanese defenders put up a rather poor fight against their invaders. Mongol weaponry and tactics caught the Japanese troops off guard and scattered the men. Uncoordinated and rattled, the Japanese suffered heavy casualties, losing a third of their forces, and were routed from Hakata. The Japanese prepared to make a final stand at a nearby fort and dug their heels in their fortifications. Their aim was to hold on as long as they could before reinforcements would arrive. In a surprise move, the Mongol forces declined pursuing the retreating Japanese further, giving the defenders time to fortify their positions. The reason for this sudden halt in movement was due to two factors: troop exhaustion and the severe injury of a Mongol commander. These prompted a rest for the Mongol host. Fearing an attack in the evening, they retreated to their ships to rest. The next morning, the Japanese prepared to fight to the last, just as it had been on Tsushima and Iki. But the winds were quiet. The unstoppable horde had all but disappeared. In the early morning, a sudden, terrible wind from the east blew the Mongol fleet back. ships were sent back toward Korea, and others were smashed apart across the rocks, killing all on board. Reports say that of the 30,000 strong force, only about half returned home. The serendipitous storm had saved Japan, giving rise to the fabled kamikaze, divine winds. A storm does appear in the penultimate act of Ghost of Tsushima, which causes the Mongols to halt their advance onto the mainland, but plays no pivotal role in wiping out the invaders like it does in history. That right is reserved exclusively for the players. The game starts off in line with what went down historically, but deviates almost immediately. Within the first 10 minutes, players have already entered the space of alternate history. The real-life conclusion also wasn't as clear-cut as it was in-game. The Mongols would come again 7 years later. As a medium of historical storytelling, Ghost of Tsushima leans more in the fictional and fantastical than being grounded. Part 2. Observing the tactics, tech, and culture. Ghost of Tsushima instantly starts off with a stark contrast of the samurai and Mongols in a shocking yet poignant opening scene. Under the Jito's orders, Lord Adachi, a samurai warrior of utmost skill, rides ahead of the vanguard to face the Mongols in single combat. The noble and brave samurai demands the Mongols send out their strongest warrior to face him. The Mongols oblige happily, and proceed to immolate and decapitate the foolishly brave samurai lord. What is shocking about this scene is not its graphic nature. It's that it actually happened. In an account written by a Japanese defender at Hakata Bay, he writes, "According to our manner of fighting, we must call out by name someone from the enemy ranks, and then attack in single combat." This lines up identically to how the samurai and Jin go about engaging the Mongols, reflective of the standoff option players have in-game. While players have the benefit of gear, AI manipulation, and skills to turn overwhelming odds into their favor, the actual samurai, they weren't so lucky. The writer quickly follows up his statement explaining how the Mongols ignored such conventions of honorable dueling, rushing up en masse to any individual trying to do so and slaughtering them before giving them a chance to retaliate. Some records state the Mongols would laugh at such provocations, considering what the samurai were doing to be foolish and outright ridiculous. Interestingly, this is also reflected in-game when engaging a large group of enemies outside of scripted duels and standoffs. Enemies will relentlessly mob players, giving little breathing room on higher difficulties due to the higher tactics of the AI and increased damage taken. Coupled with the enemy's wide arsenal, gamers need to stay on their toes to survive against the Mongol horde. The beginning hours of Ghost of Tsushima are grueling and tough for this reason. With barely any gear or skills to work with, Jin can quickly turn into a Mongol punching bag, honor notwithstanding. On top of employing tactics that went counter to the Japanese style of fighting, the Mongols had a technological advantage over the Japanese. Like certain enemies encountered in-game, the Mongols made clear and effective use of bombs, hand cannons, and large shields to overwhelm their foes. Gunpowder explosives and weapons serve two major functions: immediate lethal force of the greatest quantity, and thunderous cacophony to break apart enemy formations and morale. Bombs would scatter the defenders and scare their horses, sending them all into a frenzy and panic. Though the Japanese did possess primitive cannons, they had not developed nor employed workable and effective gunpowder weaponry during the late 13th century. It wouldn't be until the 16th century where firearms would have a wider use and appeal. The only cannon-like artillery weapon encountered in-game is the notorious hwacha. Literally meaning fire cart in Korean, it is a wagon-mounted organ gun that dispenses 100 to 200 rocket-powered arrows, capable of reaching up to distances of 2,000 meters. Like its portrayal in-game, the hwacha was mainly used in a defensive manner, and in Jin's hands is wicked fun to use. The only issue with its appearance is that the weapon itself did not exist at the time. It would be developed 2 centuries later by Korean scientists of the Joseon dynasty. Sorry, Jin. Large shields also played an important role during the invasion. They had an individual use, as seen on the regular sword and shield warriors and the gigantic brutes, but the shields were also used in certain Mongol military formations not seen in-game. Tightly packed together and supported by polearms, these dense shield formations were able to break through Japanese lines effectively. The Japanese weren't the only ones writing about the strengths of the enemy. Despite ridiculing the Japanese style of fighting bolstered by the code samurai lived by, the Mongol writers and intellectuals at the time spoke of how dangerous Japanese swords were. Various contemporary books state Japanese swords were long and sharp. Paired with a violent samurai, the two were a deadly combination. Players would be intimate with this fact. However, the Japanese sword wasn't perfect. Far from it. Swords of the 13th century, tachi, were forged to be thick and heavy, having an emphasis on hardness. This same hardness made the blades inflexible and easily damaged. The reason behind these designs was because these older blades were meant for single combat. Though the weapon was strong, it lacked the ability to take on groups of multiple foes. The sword players see in-game is not actually the type of sword that would have been used by the samurai of the era. In fact, Jin's long and short sword pairing didn't even exist at the time. Called a daisho, literally meaning big little, the stereotypical samurai loadout commonly seen became popular between the 14th and 16th century, nearly 6 decades after the invasion of Tsushima. Jin wouldn't have been supplementing his sword with a shorter one, but instead would be using the aforementioned tachi. That isn't to say the samurai didn't bolster their arsenal with other weapons. It is not known if the Japanese repurposed Mongol weapons like Jin did in-game, but the weapons he arms himself with were the tools of the trade for the samurai at the time, being primarily the sword and bow. Pole arms, naginatas, were also common choices, though Jin does not wield one. All in all, the tactics displayed in Ghost of Tsushima are remarkably faithful to how fighting would have gone down between the Mongol invaders and samurai defenders, aside from Jin's whole ghost business. Creative liberties were taken with weaponry and tech involved, but such concessions are excusable in the grand scheme of the game, as they're inoffensive and make the game more fun. In conclusion, Ghost of Tsushima plays a fine balancing act of keeping itself in line with historical authenticity while also taking dramatic license to deliver fun gameplay. It definitely isn't the first game to do so, nor is it egregious in its display of the era. Though embellished, Ghost of Tsushima gives a more or less accurate snapshot of a brutal bygone time, marrying itself well to the digital medium. There are fewer, finer avenues to take if one wants a gritty and exceptional samurai experience. This has been Gaming Instincts. If you like what you saw, be sure to check out our website and subscribe to not miss out on upcoming content on all things gaming. So tell us guys, do you think Ghost of Tsushima should have taken more creative liberties, or should it have stayed more grounded to history? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. And also guys, we are now live on Trovo, a new awesome streaming platform where you can catch us every day starting at 1 PM EST for 8 to 12 hours of streaming goodness. You can find us at trovo.live/gaminginstincts. So come join us, it'll be a blast. Thanks for watching, until next time.